Hey everyone, James Labrie from Dream Theater, and you're listening to or watching the podcast Talking into Infinity with JT and Brian. Enjoy this. These guys are extremely informative. I love their dialogue. I love their interpretation of the songs, who and what we are, what we were going after. They're very accurate in their interpretations and descriptions, and I just think this is a great show, and these guys are doing a stand-up stellar job. So once again, enjoy Talking into Infinity with JT and Brian.
What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of Talking into Infinity, a Dream Theater-centric podcast. I am your host, John. We are live on Facebook, YouTube, talkingintoinfinity.com, the CMS Rumble page, and the CMS Network. We are live at those locations every other Thursday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you are tuned in on YouTube, don't forget to click that like button, click that subscribe button, and smash that notification bell so that you are notified every time we go live. If you are looking for video replays of the show, just go to our YouTube channel. If you are looking for audio replays of the show, just Google Talking into Infinity podcast, and we are on pretty much every podcast platform that you can possibly think of. And a real quick show note before we get going here. It is the holiday season coming up here pretty quickly, and we do have our annual fan hangout coming on Friday, December 22nd at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We've already got a number of guests lined up to come on with me and Brian and help us go through that craziness. So if you would like to be a part of the fan hangout and jump on camera with us, just shoot us an email at talkingintoinfinity@gmail.com, and you can co-host the show with us for a while that night. And as always, guys, Gorilla Farts will be flowing aplenty. So without further ado, let me bring on my esteemed co-host, Mr. Brian Hendrickson. What's going on, man? How are you?
Dude, I'm very excited for this episode, and before we get into that, we do need to revisit that we did an emergency broadcast of, everyone knows on the planet now, I guess, Mike Portnoy is back.
Yep.
As we are a Dream Theater-centered podcast, and Mike Mangini is going on to pursue other things. And if you did not get a chance, please go check it out, because I think it's one of the cooler episodes we did. It was very spontaneous. And I think a lot of good dialogue regarding the return of Mike Portnoy. But anyway, about tonight's episode, man, I'm very excited about this. An incredible book Steve wrote here. And, when it comes to Van Halen, everybody wants some. They don't want to hear about it later. We got to get seriously right into it. This is going to be like, you have to be, I can't believe you're not like, you're going to be crying at some point during this episode, aren't you? You really are. I'm not even joking. This is the Holy Grail. Someone who's literally was 2 feet from Eddie Van Halen for I don't know how many years of their life, and with an arm's reach and a personal friend. And just take it away and tell us what we're about to hear here.
Well, I'm just gonna say it. We have Steven Rosen coming on the show here in just a second. He's a legendary guitar writer. He's written for Guitar World, Guitar Player, any guitar magazine you can think of. You've probably seen his writing. There are several famous pictures of him with Eddie, so you probably know him by seeing him as well. And you're right, Brian. For me, I love Dream Theater. That's why we have a Dream Theater podcast. It is Dream Theater centric, as we say. But my favorite band is Van Halen, and Eddie Van Halen literally is my hero, and I have read every single Van Halen book there is to read. And then I got this one, and it is, I'm not just saying this because Steve is coming out, it is the best Van Halen book I've ever read. And we're gonna dig deep into this with the author Steven Rosen here in a second. But yeah, Brian, this is absolutely, this pretty much is for me the Holy Grail, because it's having known almost everything there is to know about the Van Halen story through all the different things I've read and listened to and whatnot. This is an incredibly unique look into the band, but most importantly into Eddie himself. And it's something that never existed before. There is nothing like it on the market. There's nothing out there for Van Halen fans like me. So, man, without further ado, let's bring him on. He is the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Steven Rosen. What's up, man?
Guys, how you doing?
Doing great, man. Thank you so much for coming on. Ever since you agreed to do this, I have been so looking forward to this interview. It's crazy.
Oh man, that's very nice, guys. I really appreciate that. After that wonderful intro, I hope I don't disappoint here. So
I highly doubt that. So, real quick. So before I get to my first question, I want to throw out a personal story to you, because I actually had a very personal experience with Eddie Van Halen. I know that Edward is, we're talking about your book, Tonechaser, my 26-year journey with Edward Van Halen. You were friends with him from 1978 to 2003. And you had such a personal up close look at him. And, I've told the story on the show many times that I discovered music through Eddie Van Halen when I was 8 years old. And, I heard the 1984 record and my little 8-year-old brain just exploded. And then a few months later, my dad hooked up cable, and the very first video that popped up on MTV when I looked up MTV was Panama. And I was like, oh my God, that's what this guy looks like the guitar, like his look. And then when the Hot for Teacher video hit, a month or two later, and I saw him walking down that table doing the solo, I was like, I want to be Eddie Van Halen. I want to be Eddie Van Halen. For my entire life, Steve, there have been two bastions of cool. It's Han Solo in the Millennium Falcon and Eddie Van Halen in the Frankenstein. So that's the one. But I did get to meet Eddie one time, and a lot of the book centers on your experiences being in the same room with him on a one-on-one basis as a friend, and just the way that he played and just how different he was. And I had the pleasure of meeting him on the 2004 tour. Obviously, we know he was a little bit, messed up on that tour, but the show I saw, he was not. I got the special package. I got into sound check, and he played guitar for us privately for about 20 minutes. And I was literally from me to my computer screen right now to Eddie. And it was the first show he brought back the striped Charvels. He walked out with a black and with a white with black striped Charvel, and I about shit my pants. I was like, oh my God, he hasn't played that in forever. Well, anyway, he gets done soloing and everything. And, this. Eddie always said I'm a musician. I'm not a rock star. He hated all the fame and the trappings and all that crap. Well, there was only 50 of us that got this package. And the people behind me are just going, Eddie, and doing that thing and holding up the signs as God thinks all this other stuff. And I saw him waving and being cool, but I saw him rolling his eyes and stuff. And I was like, man, he really doesn't like this. And I have a very big family history of cancer. I mentioned that in email, with you, Steve. And Eddie had beaten cancer, the year before. And I just tugged on his jeans. I was like, you know what? I'm going to take my shot. And I was tugging on his jeans, Eddie. And finally looks like, goes, what the fuck do you want? And I said, hey, man, fuck music. You beat cancer. It's just nice to see you healthy and able to do what you do, man. Just congratulations. And he got down and he gave me a big hug. And he goes, thank you, man. That means a lot to me. And to me, that made Eddie a person. He was this larger than life figure to me. And it humanized him. It made him a person for me. And your book, I think, does that for Van Halen fans, because we've all read all the stories. We talked for a minute before we jumped on all the stories about, the piano competitions and what happened with David Lee Roth and, working with Don Landy at weird hours of the morning for Fair Warning, all that stuff. But we've never gotten to look into Eddie as a person, as himself, just like not Eddie, the guitar guy, just, Edward Lodewijk Van Halen, the guy. And your book does that, which is absolutely amazing. So first and foremost, tell us a little bit about the genesis of the book, because this is such a unique look into one of the greatest musicians of our time.
Okay, where do I begin? In order to tell you about this book, as I wrote in my intro, you need to know about the book that was supposed to happen back in 1985. So I had known Edward for about 7 or 8 years at that point. And, I could just sense the legend of him was growing. I mean, he was becoming just huge, and people were talking about him, and I sensed that, writers are going to approach him and want to write a book about him. So I said, I'm going to ask him, I want to be the guy to write his book. So I approached him and finally found the chutzpah to ask him. And he said, yes, you can write that book. I can't think of any other writer who could do that. And that kind of blew me away. So for several years, probably at least 3 years, maybe more actually, on and off, I started gathering interviews, and I interviewed friends from Pasadena and guys who were promoting the shows that Van Halen was doing back in Pasadena. Some of the musicians, pre-Van Halen as we know them. Tech guys. I interviewed Michael and Dave and Alex, and Rudy Laren and the guitar techs and guys. Ideally, because I was going to put this book together about Edward. And so I would approach Ed and I go, Ed, man, we need to sit down and I need to talk to you, about the book, not about guitars, not like for a Guitar World interview, but, I want to know about, when you were a kid, and what was that like when you were growing up back in the Netherlands, and what kind of kid were you? And, what was the relationship like with you and your parents, and what relatives did you have around? And how did you get along with Alex? And why did you start smoking when you were 12 years old and drinking? And, and all these questions that had to be a part of the book. And Ed always said, well, listen, I don't think now is the right time. That was his phrase, and Ed had this thing in his head that a book only came out on an artist when his career was over. And I said, Ed, you're the only one on the planet who would ever think that. I go, that's not true. But for Ed, that's what the reality was. And so I kept trying to push him as hard as I thought was, reasonable. And I just couldn't get him to sit down or commit to the book. So the relationship ends in 2003. Fast forward 17 years. And I had thought about the book off and on, but never really seriously. And for several reasons. One, I knew what an enormous task it was going to be. Just collating and chronicling the interviews and the tapes and getting my memories together. I go, my God, how can I remember stuff that happened? Some of this stuff happened, 1977, 78. So what is that? 45 years ago. I thought I'll never be able to remember that stuff. And, so that was point one. And point two was I didn't know if I had it in me as a journalist, as a writer. And I write about this in the book. I wanted to write the greatest book that was ever going to be written about Edward Van Halen. I didn't know if I was capable of doing that. I didn't know if I was a good enough writer. If I had the words, if I had that knowledge to put all those pieces together to celebrate this enormous talent, I wanted the book to resonate with the reader the same way when you went to a Van Halen concert and Ed would take a solo, the way that you were blown away by a solo. I wanted the book to be elevated to that level, and I didn't know if I was capable of doing that, So I put it off for a lot of years. And then finally, I had a couple of people say, man, you got to write the book, and, I put them off and I thought, okay. So I kind of sat down, and it really wasn't specifically thinking I'm going to start my book today. And that day was August 24th, my birthday. And I do remember that day. It was more like, let me try to put down some thoughts, some ideas, and see what happens. And I remember sitting down, and what kind of took shape was the introduction. And I thought, you know what, that's pretty cool. That's kind of different. I've never read anything like that. And I just kind of, followed my nose. And the next day, actually the next morning, because my cat Arpeggio was waking me up at these ungodly hours. So at, 3 o'clock in the morning, I'd wake up and feed him. And
what a great name.
Right. And then walk into the computer room and, write a little bit more. And 14 months later, the book was done. I didn't think it would ever be done. I'm at like 125,000 words, and that's typically the length of most music biographies. And I thought, my God, I'm not halfway done. And I thought, fuck it. I'm just going to keep writing. It's my book, man. And if you want to read it, great. And if you don't want to read it, don't. Obviously, I wanted people to read it, but
Sure.
I realized how long the book was going to be, but I had 26 years to cover. And so as a long answer to a short question, John, that was kind of the genesis of Tonechaser.
Man, how difficult was this to, because going through it, I think again, we talked about you humanizing Edward, but this is not just a story that you're telling. Like, this is personal to you, and it doesn't end the way you would like it to end. So how difficult was this for you, not only to actually finally get to put the book together, but have to revisit some things that, being frank, were probably, painful to revisit?
It was unbelievably difficult because those moments were so personal to me. I mean, no one ever read about them, much less knew about them. I mean, I may have spoken to my brother, who was there the night I met Edward, and I've immortalized my brother Mick. And I might have said, yeah, Mick, I came back from Ed's, and he was, man, it wasn't good. And I don't know what's happening. And so it was really hard, and trying to locate the memories was one thing. And then listening to the tapes and going, oh, fuck, yeah, that's what happened during that conversation, man. And Ed had changed so much. And what was I doing? What was I saying to him to antagonize him like that? What could I have possibly done, And that went through my head, man, every time I listened to one of these conversations. So it was extraordinarily difficult. It would have been really easy to have avoided those bits, I mean, I could have taken the easy way out and not gone as deep, but then I thought, I can't do that. If I'm going to finally sit down and write it, it has to be the most honest book it can possibly be. And it has to be honest to me. It has to be honest to Edward, who was alive at the point that I started writing it. And it's got to be honest, an honest portrayal to the reader and the fan. Only one or two people have said to me, man, you should not have written that. You should not have included that. That has nothing to do with Edward. That has nothing to do with his music. And certainly, I don't want to refer to what moment this one person specifically is talking about. You can read about that. But these were those more personal moments. And I really disagree. I think it is those moments that reveal so much about him, that humanizes him so much, that without those little bits in there, I think the book is diminished a lot. And I want to say here, the last thing I ever wanted to do, and anybody who reads this book, I would think understands that, was to hurt anybody, Edward or his family, to embarrass anybody, to try to talk trash. I mean, my God, if I thought I was doing that, man, I never would have included those bits at all. But I didn't think that was the case. I didn't think I was embarrassing anybody. Edward said those things to me. He said, you can record anything you want. I waited 17 years to write about some of those moments. And I thought, I thought those parts were, I thought they were amazing moments. They were so deep and inside, and they were incredibly personal. But they just had to be included, I thought.
Yeah, I got a quick comment, and then O'Brien has a question. But I would agree with you, Steve. And this is hard for me to say because I'm not trying to disparage this person, but there was a book written couple years ago, I think it was, and I bought it because I wanted everything Van Halen, and it was I'll just say, the guy's name is Andrew Bennett. He wrote, Eruption in the Canyon, and it's got some amazing pictures. It's a crazy time in Eddie's life, and there's not a lot of words to it. It's mostly pictures. It's a very picturesque book. But that one, I felt some of the stories he told, he was trying to talk about Eddie's work ethic and this, that, and the other, show what a hard worker he was and why he was the way he was. But I thought some of those came across as a little embarrassing. Whereas with your book, you lay it all out on the table, and I didn't get that vibe. It was just like you said, this is what he said, and it was incredibly deep. I don't think it came across as disrespectful at all. I mean, so it's odd that people would have that outlook. I think because I know people have said about Sammy Hagar's biography, oh, you shouldn't have said that about him on the 2004 tour, this, that, and the other. And to me, that was just kind of facts as well. But yeah, I don't see anything disrespectful about any of the things that you showed. I mean, you love the guy. You say it throughout the book so many times, and it's, you're obviously not doing anything to hurt him. So you come from a place of purity. So I don't understand how people could have well,
I appreciate that. Yeah. And really, if you read the book, you understand that it's a 580-page homage to this guy I was friends with. Yep. I mean, I could have, I could have, nerded out the entire book, and, I tried to keep that in check and let you understand why I was feeling like that and how would you feel, so I tried to put that in context and approach it from a different way. But yeah, anybody who reads the book, I would think that's what they would come away with. Absolutely.
Real quick, Brian, before you get to your question, guys, if you want to pick up your copy of Tonechaser, Understanding Edward, my 26-year journey with Edward Van Halen, just go to tonechaserbook.com. That's where you can pick up a copy. It is excellent. It's over 550 pages. It is extremely detailed. Some really great pictures in there. It's a fantastic read. So go pick up your copy. Brian, go ahead. Sorry about that. Just want to get a plug in.
Oh, it's okay. This is great stuff, man. So a quick question here. So it's one of those stories of you're always kind of the victim of your own success, right? Because you have to, the bar is set higher and higher. And it was just fascinating reading like the comments of, I think they get to 84 or Diver Down or whatever it was. And everyone's like, all right, Dave, especially, a lot of people are like, okay, Ed, what do you have for us? And it got to a point where obviously he's sort of resenting that because it's the fact like, look, you become a victim of your own thing. And it's similar to the Beach Boys, if you've seen any of the long form series they did where Brian Wilson, okay, he's the genius behind it. And then he gets in the studio and starts showing them stuff off of Pet Sounds. I'm like, well, like what the, and Eddie's showing, hey, we got Jump here now. And Dave are kind of like, what? And do you think he balanced that okay, being sort of in that role of like, I don't want to piss anybody off, but at the same time, I've got to really go forth with this vision? It seemed like that was something that was always wrestling with him. He didn't really want to come across as the bad guy. And I wonder if there's times, do you think maybe he more should have?
Those are all excellent points. I can tell you that Eddie resented the shit out of when it was time to go in to do a new record. And it's, what do you got, Eddie? And I talk about that little phrase in the book. And it's just so, with Ed, it was all about respect. And look, nobody else in the band wrote, right? Michael didn't write. Alex didn't write. Alex might have been there with Edward when Ed was maybe messing around with new guitar riffs, and Al was, messing around on drums and may have come up with grooves and stuff. And Dave wrote lyrics and melodies, but he didn't come in with a song. So Edward understood what his role was. And I think he really embraced that role. But when the approach of the other guys, came down to, what do you got, Eddie? As if we don't have to do shit. We know our guitar player Ed's going to come up with stuff. And we'll just tag along. He hated that. And it was not that they didn't bring in ideas, though he urged Michael, and I write about that, and set up that little, recording system for Mike to, work out bass parts and, work on that thing. And Mike never utilized that. To Ed, that was all disrespect. So with Ed, it was not that he had the shoulder of that, because he was capable of that. He was obviously a very prolific guy, but it was the disrespect. It was them saying, "Oh, well, we don't really care enough, and we're a little too busy, and we know you're going to do it, Ed." And that made him insane. I also write about Ed, to your point, Brian. Ed oftentimes did take the path of least resistance, and he'd walk down a trail, if it was a little wider than this other trail that might have been a little more challenging. Honestly, yes, I think he should have pushed back more. Look, that's easy for me to say. I mean, but being around him, and I saw the grief and the angst and the distress, and it affected his health. It made him sad. I saw all those things resulting from the band just sort of relegating him to this role. Yes, I think he should have pushed back more. I think he should have demanded more out of those guys. I think he should have told Dave, "Do not fucking go on a vacation for 2 weeks while I'm in the studio. All right, you're gonna stay here, and you're gonna fucking work on lyrics. And why don't you come into the studio with me?" Look, I don't know if that's the way they wrote, but I don't think they were ever in the same room when Ed was working on a guitar riff, and Dave was coming up with melodies. That would happen with Sammy, and you get that whole different dynamic of the songs and the song structures. I'm not saying it's better or worse. It was just, it was an entirely different setting. But yeah, and Mike come in with an idea. And, I said, well, Mike's probably intimidated, I mean, who wouldn't be, right? It's like, George Harrison coming in to Paul and John, coming in with an idea. But the truth is, George did come in with ideas, and they were amazing. And again, I don't think it was that Edward expected Mike to come in with an amazing idea, though I'm sure he would have embraced that. He just wanted to see Michael putting out the effort. That's what was important to Edward. And by Michael not doing that and hiding behind, "Oh, I'm intimidated," Ed looks at that as disrespect. And Ed says, "Well, fuck him. He's, I've known him for 7 years. Get over it." And that's how Ed looked at it. I mean, I really understand that. I really do. As hard as that could be, you're in a band. That's your gig. That's your job. Come in with some bass ideas, Dave, show Edward some lyrics before he presents the music to you. "Look, man, I'm talking out loud. These are my thoughts." But I think, yeah, they made Ed crazy. And they ultimately made him sick, the fair warning. And I write about that, and Ed talks about losing weight, man, and getting an ulcer and being really sick. That was all because he loved the music so much, and somehow these other guys didn't seem to love the music as much as he did, and he couldn't understand that. So, yeah, so because of that, yeah, Edward would take the easy way out sometimes, and yeah, okay, I'll do that. I'll shoulder it, and
You mentioned an interesting word. This was actually going to be my next question, and you used the word, intimidating. I've always kind of thought that maybe, I mean, that's got to be the genesis of it. You would think, even with a guy like David Lee Roth, the guy's got an ego from hell. We all know he's the one that's holding up the Eddie Van Halen tribute concert, from happening. And if you disagree, I apologize. I just, that guy, holy crap, man, what an ego in him. But anyway, like having watched him play in person, and again, it was only for 20 minutes, you got to see it so many times. I mean, I would think it would have to be the intimidation factor, because when you're in a room with that guy, you're like, how can I possibly compete with that or add to that? I mean, that seems to make total sense to me. I mean, is that kind of where your thinking is on that, or was it just those guys were lazier than Ed?
I don't think lazy is the right word, because look, I mean, Dave Dave must have spent a lot of time working out those lyrics and melodies. And even Ed says, you know, some of my stuff's not that easy to write over, you know, and I give Dave credit. And I do. I do. I can absolutely understand being intimidated. I get it. You know, I mean, I get it. But I think you gotta go beyond that, man. This is your gig, you know, this is your life, you know, this is your art. And I think you just you've got to go beyond that, you know. Look, I'm not putting this on the same level whatsoever, but you know, when I was around Ed sometimes, and you know, Ed would come over and I write about it, you know, and Ed comes over to my house and I'm there writing a song with my buddy, and you know, it's kind of like, Ed, you know, would you maybe play something? I mean, it's like, I can't believe I asked Edward Van Halen to fucking play it, you know, but it's like,
right.
You know, and honestly, man, even the moments when I'm interviewing him, you know, those were, I mean, I love those moments, but they were hard, you know, and I had to like sit outside myself and look at this guy interviewing the greatest fucking guitar player maybe who's ever lived, you know. And that was not an easy thing to do, man. But you gotta go way outside your comfort zone to do that. I don't think it was that Dave and Mike were lazy. They just didn't. And they might say that, Rosen, you're totally full of shit. They just didn't love the music or care about the music at the end of the day as much as Edward did.
Yeah.
Look, nobody's going to have that work ethic, right? No one's going to work like Ed did, you know, building your own studio so you can work virtually 24 hours a day. But I mean, I think that's one of the things really that led to the breakup of the band. I think ultimately Ed couldn't take that anymore. You know, he wanted to try something new. Brings in Sammy Hagar, and that's the honeymoon period for a while. And then that thing turns sour. Look, I think at the end of the day as well, I don't think Edward was maybe the easiest guy to play music with. In many ways, he was incredibly giving, but man, at the same time, he wanted the fucking best out of you. You didn't have to be you didn't have to be Jack Bruce or Tim Bogert or John Entwistle, but you had to give 100%, and anything less was disrespect. And Ed saw that instantly, and from there on, it was downhill. So yeah, I get that it wasn't easy being around Edward Van Halen, but the other side of that is you're now in the presence of this guy, and you should really be thankful that you are in a band with somebody like this, and all of those things. A lot of people will tell you that Van Halen could never have done what it had done without Dave. You know, I mean, I don't really know how to argue that. You know, if they had another singer in there when they first came out, and Ed had been playing those riffs, and there was a whole different set of lyrics and melodies, I mean, who can say, look, Dave was critical. Let's face it. You know, Dave was that outsized ego. Edward was not. Dave was the front guy. Dave was responsible for a lot of the visuals, you know, a lot of those videos that Ed gets credit for. So, you know, I don't know. For a while it worked, you know, but after a while, I don't think Ed could deal with it anymore. And time to move on.
I thought it was interesting, and I wrote this down. I hope I had this quote right. It said, Ed told you at one point, I think you were basically saying, like, well, why don't you just tell those guys to get it together or move on or something. I'm paraphrasing here. And Ed said, I'm not confident enough to demand what I want. And that, dude, I wrote that down. Like, I'm starting to I'm getting old, so I keep this journal of, like, quotes now. Dude, that is going in there because that is one of the most amazing things, because he was vulnerable enough to admit that, and yet he's expecting these guys who kind of, as you're both saying, are probably like looking at him going, how the hell am I going to do what this guy wants or top what this guy wants? And Eddie Van Halen alone is saying, hey, I'm not confident enough to demand what I want. And to further that point, just real quick about Roth, Dave said something like, look, I know Ed's happy if he's miserable. Do you think there's a tad bit of truth to that statement? It's kind of like the yin drives the yang type of a thing. Like you need the dark and the light. You need that polar opposite pushing against each other. And I understand that there's a shelf life on that, but do you think that fueled them for a certain amount of time?
Honestly, man, I do not. I think when Ed was unhappy, he was unhappy. I don't think he generated any joy out of it, or the loner thing. I disagree with that totally, and I know that somewhere in print Ed was saying, he's fucked up. Dave's the one who's happy when he's miserable. That line you pulled out, Brian, is a really interesting line. I'm not confident enough to demand what I want. I mean, which could be an encapsulation of the entire book, and just the humility of the guy on some levels is just unbelievable, And I think what he was also referring to is that if he did demand these things, Mike, this is the rig, man. You're going to, listen to the tracks without the bass. You're going to come over 45 minutes early. I'm going to show you some ideas on bass. You're going to work, Dave, you're not going off on vacation, man. You're going to stay here. We're going to sit and we're going to write, we're going to be ahead of the curve. I think he somehow maybe even thinks, well, God, maybe if I piss them off too much, now this is just me thinking, maybe if what's going to happen, I don't know. And it goes back to my statement about Ed sometimes taking the path of least resistance. There's a perfect example of that. It's unbelievable to me. But no, Ed was unhappy when he was unhappy. I can tell you the first two albums, the first two tours is when he was exuberant, man. I know he was happiest then. He was just always, man, so buoyant. And though there were cracks in the armor early on, they didn't matter. They didn't matter as much. Everything was new to him. Man, he was on a rocket to the moon. He's gone from playing backyard parties to the whiskey to, opening for, some of his heroes to jumping out on his own with Day on the Green, headlining. My God, what a very, very quick rise to fame. But yeah, I thought Edward always should have demanded more, on a lot of levels, management. Sammy comes in with his manager. I go, who would do that? I couldn't possibly understand Ed. There's no way that can lead to something good down the road. I didn't say that to him. I didn't think it was my place. Should I have said something? I don't know. He talks about Ted Templeman, and I know he loved Ted and recognized Ted as a critical element, and Ted was. And then he says some of those things about Ted, and Ted doesn't work on some records and then brings Ted back. I could never understand that. But there was something in Ed. Maybe he felt comfortable, So I don't know. Finding a singer. Ed says to me, go find me a singer. I think, yeah, right. I'm going to find you a singer. Like you don't know any singers.
Yeah.
Like you couldn't call up fucking Roger Daltrey and have him sing in your band. You know what I mean? But he was serious, and it's not that he didn't know singers. Obviously he knew a million singers, but I don't know if he wanted to or had any desire to sort of connect those dots about what was required to, maybe have them send in audition tapes or get Alex and him in a room and bring sing. I do not know, man. I just do not know. But so he finds Sammy through his mechanic. And what if they didn't have the same mechanic? Hattie Smythe, and maybe that would have been cool. I don't know, but yeah, man. I think Ed, just because he was such a singular artist in this world, I think he should have asked for the sun and the moon and the stars, and his band should have given that to him. Those are my feelings.
So really quickly, and I did laugh at the part where Ed's asking you to find him a singer, and you're like, wait, are you serious? Did you like actually go on an active hunt? Like, were you scouring clubs or just looking for talking to people? Did you actually try to find like an underground, nobody's ever heard of this guy, he might be good for you?
Honestly, I didn't, because I thought he was joking. I did play one tape for him of a singer, and I don't want to mention his name. And he hated it. He heard like 5 seconds. He goes, no, that's not right. Yeah. And it's funny because Ed loved Bon Scott, and yet Sammy is about the antithesis of Bon Scott, And I think I had likened Dave to Bon Scott once, and I thought they had kind of a little bit of a growl, and they said, nah, Dave's not anything like Bon Scott. I think he got pissed off that I made that comment. But no, Brian, I never did. Honestly, man, I wish I had. I wish I could have said, yeah, man, I'm the guy who found the singer for Van Halen, because exactly what you suggested is what I thought they should have done, was find an unknown singer, some unbelievable guy who would have, drained blood to have sat there in a room with Edward Van Halen writing songs. Warner Brothers would never have allowed that. The tape that you played him, though, can you at least say, was that like somebody who has recorded and we would have heard of? You don't have to, obviously. Okay. I'm just curious.
Wow.
I figured it was. But...
Yeah, it was not an unknown guy.
Ozzy Osbourne.
Yeah, it's Ozzy.
Bruce Dickinson.
Bruce Dickinson. Here's Jeff Tate. No, not him. Yeah. So real quick, and not to sidetrack, but I did have you just brought up a very interesting point. So we are talking about Van Halen, and you made the comment that you thought they should have gotten an unknown guy with some incredible set of pipes and everything. Do you think it would have been as successful at that point? Because I feel like, full disclosure, I love all the Van Halen records, but my favorite era is the Sammy stuff by like the tiniest smidge. Mm-hmm. I've always felt like the Sammy's infusion of like his positive energy and his experience kind of helped drag them through that quagmire that Dave had created near the end. How do you think it would have been as successful as the Sammy years with 4 straight #1 records and all the tours and all that? Do you think that an unknown guy could have gotten them to that level? Do you think just amazing singing chops and being a great frontman would have had the same result?
Well, when you confront me like that, John, I have to. Thanks.
Like that. Now I feel like an ass.
Thanks for nothing. No, I mean, it's probably doubtful, unless somehow there was something in this guy that triggered audiences, and it was like seeing I don't know, Mick Jagger for the first time or something. I mean, the reality was, Van Halen. I mean, they were such a proven entity, and people had this sense of them that, I mean, when I think about it, certainly, bringing in an unknown probably wouldn't have worked. I guess I love the idea, because I think that it would have given Ed a chance to really expand everything he wanted to do, man. And, he could have brought all the keyboards in with the new singer and, the new studio, and, I don't know, maybe they would have made one record and it wouldn't have worked, and they would have gotten Sammy. I mean, I don't really know, but I mean, the truth of it is, if I really look at it, it's highly doubtful. They were such a, people had these expectations from them. I never would have guessed Sammy Hagar being the singer. I mean, that was I mean, Edward got it, obviously, and it obviously worked, as you said. So, which brings sort of a peripheral point, John. There was talk about Ed doing a solo record and bringing in different singers. Mm-hmm. I thought that could have been amazing. Phil Collins, I mean, that would have been, to hear, especially if they could have written together. The one that I really thought would have been extraordinary was Pete Townsend.
Yeah,
That to
for
me
sure.
would have been, oh my God, that would have been amazing. And I have the little discussion in the book, and Ed wanted to do it at 5150, so he wanted Pete to fly over there, and he wanted to use Mike and Al, which was a tribute to Mike and Al. And Pete, I think, was thinking, no, you're going to come over to England. I think by that time, Keith had passed away. I don't know if John was still alive, but he kind of wanted to use his mates, right, in his studio. I think that would have been amazing. And yeah, Patti Smythe, I think Joe Cocker was mentioned. That could have been amazing. Then we really would have had a sense, though those are all known entities, I think we would have had a sense of Edward writing outside of Van Halen, because obviously his writing is not going to be, he's not going to write a Van Halen lick for Phil Collins. I thought that could have been amazing. And that's sad that never materialized.
Yeah.
But that's Ed again thinking, well, why should I do that? Who's really, and this is me postulating, I don't think Ed saw any importance in it, and who would really care, and why would I do that when everything I want to do is with Van Halen? There was no sense of the his own legacy and stepping outside of who he was at all, so it's sad. I mean, I wish someone had pushed him more, Al or management, I would think that maybe the label would have embraced something like that, but there you go.
See, and to your point, like, and again, I feel like an ass putting you on the spot with that other question. Like, I just had to ask, but
I'm kidding, man.
I think, that it might have had actually, let me phrase it a different way. The only reason I think that it might not have had a chance with an unknown singer is because of what I feel is Eddie's most underrated quality, at least in the public eye. And it ties into what you were just saying about this solo album with, Phil Collins and Joe Cocker and Pete Townsend. It's his songwriting. Like, people talk about him as this guitar god, but no one talks enough about what an unbelievable songwriter he was. And I think, an unknown singer at the time when Sammy came in, who maybe was not familiar with, this type of whirlwind atmosphere, like maybe wouldn't have latched on to the interesting arrangements that Eddie had. But the solo record, I think, to your point, would have been absolutely fucking killer, because he was writing all this varying stuff, and he could write, hey, here's maybe like a mellower tune for a Phil Collins, and something more aggressive for this guy, like, I mean, so to your point, I think that would have been fantastic as well. I've always thought the exact same thing, because he wrote in so many different styles but they were all Van Halen rock and roll. That, I mean, because one thing that doesn't get talked about a lot in the book, because it's very personal, you're talking about more personal things, but his songwriting ability, no one really talks about that enough. And I knowing him as you did, I'm sure you probably would agree with that, because you sat and you wrote a song with him. He came in and worked with your buddy, like, not to tell tales out of school from the book, but
yeah,
you got to write a song with Eddie Van Halen. So, I mean, talk about his songwriting ability a little bit.
His talents as a composer and orchestrator are highly neglected. And you bring up the amazing night when he comes over to my house in the Hollywood Hills, and I'm there with my buddy Ron De La Vega, and we're working on one of my songs. And there's a knock at the door, and I open it up, and Ed's there, and I didn't know he was coming over, and he walks in, and he sees us, the little 4-track, and my buddy Ron is playing keyboards, and what's the first thing Ed does? He walks over, and he picks up a guitar, and watching him and listening to him, and he talks about it, you realize that he really understands in a very organic way how to build a song and how to, orchestrate a song. And watching him and listening to him, I had a much deeper understanding of how he approached his own music. He was an unbelievable writer. And if you think about those Van Halen songs, I mean, the first couple records, maybe in the first 3 or 4 records. I mean, those are like short songs. Those are like pop songs. They're like under 3 minutes, man. And the solo sections are, I don't know what they are, 8 bars or 16 bars. They're not these drawn out solo sections. And for Ed, it was, cutting off all the meat. He just had this unbelievable intuition, and certainly a lot of that comes, and I think Ed maybe downplays a little bit the knowledge that came from playing piano. Obviously, all of music is based on the piano keyboard, and harmony and melody and everything. So I think Ed knew a shit more than people even give him credit for. And a lot of his chords, these are like these weird, sus augmented, keyboard chords, and the stretches and things. With Ed, it was just so subtle. He would, if you listen to his songs or that night that he hung out at my place, and he would play, and he'd play the verse, and then he'd add just a simple little extra accent, and it was just so perfect, and I'd been writing songs for about 800 years at that time. And obviously I was nowhere near the guitar player he was, but I thought I had a decent understanding of songwriting, and I understood, harmonic composition and, perfect and imperfect cadences and leading tone, and I listened to the Beatles and Sting. I mean, I couldn't write like that in a million years, but I understood, and I thought, I had a little bit of an understanding, and I watched him, and for 5 minutes, like, oh my God, that's what it is.
Yeah.
I would never have played that. I would never have thought that in a million years. Yeah, man, it was a combination of having the knowledge and then kind of approaching it organically. It was amazing. Yeah. And see, to your point, John, those songs were so amazing. It's like you would have to be like a really bad singer not to be able to come up with something that sounded like really good over it.
The verses are like choruses, yeah.
I get that Sammy's a professional, he's done it all those years. I don't know, man. I still think there was some singer out there who could have come in and blown everybody away. It would have been unbelievable. I don't know. I'm gonna hang tough here, John. I'm not gonna let you push me around here. But yeah, man, his songwriting skills were scary, and I saw him, and we'd sit and we'd play guitars once in a while, and I'd hear how he'd, go over a riff, go over a riff. Oh, that's not working, and it was remarkable, man.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, like with the chords, like I play guitar, bass, drums. I'm actually a singer by trade, whatever. But I love I try to learn Van Halen stuff. I'm not great. And one of my favorite riffs of all time is the title track to 5150. So I checked out the tab and I was like, what in God's name is this 5-finger crap? Like, I can't play that. I mean, he'll go from something like Somebody Get Me a Doctor, which is like a pull off power chord, to 5150, which is, like palm muting an entire chord, but then breaking it down like as a broken, like it goes from the most simplistic to the most difficult, and it all flows so goddamn well. Like even 5150 itself, that riff is so difficult. And then it just goes to like, I mean, it's unbelievable. And I just think it doesn't get talked about enough. So we do have a question in the chat for you. Our very good buddy Discuss Metal Joe says, may I have permission to record the audiobook? JT and Brian can read it, so it'll sound great. Can't wait to read the book. Are there any plans for an audiobook?
Not at the moment.
Especially not if JT and Brian are going to read it, right?
Right. Oh my God.
Not at the moment. Maybe somewhere down the road. Yeah, we'll see.
I just, as somebody who drives like 2 hours one way to play gigs with my band, so I'm an audiobook-ophile. I got to tell you, I would Holy shit, would I devour that, man? My wife would hate me. Like, are we listening to this again? Yes, we are. Now be quiet. Go back to sleep. So
Funny.
I'm trying to picture. So, Steve, are you this guy at the end of the bar and I'm out on a weeknight and I just say, hey, what do you do? And you start regaling someone of tales of, well, I got to hear Out of Love Again and Light Up the Sky and, what would become the best of both worlds before they were actually on an album. Is this like a Tom Brady Super Bowl syndrome where you can't, when it's happening at the time, you're like, oh my God, but you still can't really appreciate it until you get to a place like now? And you're just like, does it just blow your mind thinking of what you got to experience?
It's pretty surreal. But in answer to your first question, Brian, if I'm the guy at the end of the bar and somebody says, "What do you do?" Or "What have you seen?" I go, "Well, I write for music magazines." I'm not the guy that's gonna say, "Yeah, man, I hung out with everybody." Right. But anyway,
yeah, cut this guy off.
We got that out of the way. But there are moments in the book, and I write about it. I specifically address that. I say, as the sort of the big question, why me? Why me? Edward could have had friends, and he could have made friends with anybody he wanted. They could have been brilliant guys or, other famous musicians. And obviously he had other famous musician buddies. But then I kind of turned around and I said, well, why not me? You talk about yin and yang. I mean, I was certainly the yang to Edward's yin. I was introverted. I had very little self-confidence. But Ed always made me feel like so big, and so sure and confident. But yes, man, I listen to those tapes and those interviews, and there'll be a moment when I go, my God, I'm really sitting there talking to him about this thing, or my God, Ed really came over that day, and he's really playing my piece of shit Strat, and he's playing those songs from the Van Halen 2 record, And even to this day, and even as I talk about it, it's that weird thing. You kind of go in and out because we are talking about stuff that happened 46 years ago.
Yep.
So I mean, just the memories themselves are so distant. But trying to capture the emotions and trying to recreate the situation. Yeah, sometimes I think, did that really happen? I mean, yes, I know it really happened because I'm talking to you about it. And I can look on my walls and I can see pictures of me and Edward and go, okay, I was there, that happened. But yes, in a really cerebral, emotional way, yes, a lot of it seems impossible that it ever happened, or certainly that it was that long a period. It really, really does feel like that.
Is it the ultimate irony though? Because you say many times where Ed seemed very defensive and insecure, and then here he's the guy sort of picking you up, saying, "No, man, you're my bud. You're a competent songwriter, guitar player. What you're doing is cool. Change this around or whatever. I trust you as a friend." And you just talk about that for a second.
So it only took me 580 pages to try to understand Edward.
12 hours of therapy.
Exactly. I try to understand the dynamic between us. And yes, man, everything you say is true and incredibly complex. Edward, and I can only describe it as Edward was very secure in himself as this guitar player. And he knew who he was. I take that back. I don't think he knew who he was. He knew he knew he was a very, very good guitar player. he knew that. You didn't have to say to him, my God, Ed, that was amazing. Like you talked about before, he would get defensive, and he didn't like that. Because somehow by defining it, by saying it was really good, that somehow lessened it in some way. Like he didn't need to hear it. Like the artistry itself didn't need to be defined. You don't need to tell me that it's good. I know it's good, you know. And I always give the example of, you know, you're sitting there watching Da Vinci paint, you know, and you go, wow, that looks really good, you know, and he'd like turn and go, I know that. I don't need to hear that. You know what I mean? So that was a difficult tightrope to balance on, because part of me wanted to say, Ed, my God, that's amazing. Ed, that's incredible. Every time he played me something, or every time he said something to me. But in getting back to your point, Brian, whenever I had those feelings, you know, he was always there, and he would never, ever make me feel like, oh, come on, man, you don't be an asshole. Don't be I mean, he might sort of say that to kind of kick me out of that mood, but it was never to make fun of me or belittle me. You know, man, he was unbelievable. And yeah, there were moments when he, you know, for want of a better description, needed a shoulder to cry on. You know, when Dave left, he was hurt. I mean, he was really hurt bad, you know, and I have those discussions in there, and it was this thing, and somehow he needed something in me, and I needed something from him. You know, I think on some levels, you know, had I been sort of like this, maybe like an amazing guitar player, or, you know, some Nobel Prize winning author, and who was sure of himself and walked that way and, you know, talked that way, maybe this dynamic doesn't happen. I mean, at the heart of it, like, you know, I told you, I'm the guy at the end of the bar. If somebody talks to me, I go, yeah, well, I write, you know. I mean, I really am that person, you know. And maybe Ed found comfort in that. Maybe Ed, he felt safe there, you know. And if nothing else, being a rock journalist is being a listener, and trying to understand the mind of the electric guitar player. And I think I'm pretty good at that. But yeah, man, it was a very tangled dynamic, you know, that would change later on. And that was because it changed and it morphed into this other thing. That's when things got hurtful. And yeah, I mean, I was really kind of crushed by what had happened. But yeah, I mean, I love the guy for that. I mean, he was like a, you know, my psychologist, and, you know, I could say just about anything to the guy. Play guitar in front of him? Who's going to play guitar in front of Eddie Van Halen, you know? But, you know, again, it goes back to that thing about respect. And I tried. It's like, Ed, I'm trying to get the fucking finger thing you do, you know, and I do it over and over, and it's wrong. And I get one that's right. He goes, yeah, man, that's it. And that's all he wanted to hear. He didn't care that I didn't play guitar as well as he did. That could not have cared less. But I tried, you know, and that's what was important to him. So I think he knew, or I hope that he knew that, you know, how much I cared about him, you know, and would never hurt him. And I don't think I ever did.
Well, I think, you know, you use a word throughout the book, Steve, that I think is such a great way to describe Edward. It's like you use the word humility so many times. And I would say, and this is just an outside observation, but the fact that you wrote this book, and as much as this is a, you know, it's kind of a very, very intimate view of Ed, it's also an intimate view of you. And as I've read this, I think that one of the reasons it resonates so well, and one of the reasons that I think you guys were as close as you were, I come back to the term emotionally honest, you know, and I don't think a lot of people are emotionally honest, but Edward, from, you know, even in the interviews that are just the public ones that we see, he tends to say more than your average quote unquote rock star. And with the stories that you tell and the conversations that you detail, I think you're the same way. And I think that's where it came from, is that he saw, I hate using this term, it's so cliche, but follow me here, a kindred spirit. You know what I mean? Like, and he understood that you understood where he was coming from on an emotional level. Do you think that's accurate at all?
I think it's very accurate, John. And if you look at the beginning of the relationship, I met Edward that night in June 1977, July, August, October, November, December, 8 months before the first record comes out. So he was just Edward Van Halen, a guy in a local band who had signed a deal on Warner Brothers. Now that to me was monstrous. I mean, that was incredible. But he was not yet Edward Van Halen legend. And on top of that, I had never heard, and I write about this, and somehow I don't know how it ever happened, I had never heard him play. I'd never seen Van Halen play before I met him. So I'm kind of talking to him that first time just as this guy. I mean, I was a music journalist, but I'm not speaking to him as a music journalist. I'm speaking to him as someone who was introduced to him by a common friend, Michelle Meyer, who booked the whiskey. And she knew I was writing for guitar magazines, and she knew this guitar player, Edward Van Halen, was upstairs. You got Steve, you got to meet this guy. So we just start talking. So I think that seed, you know, if I can use that term, was really planted there. And Ed, it was just this amazing conversation. And virtually every conversation we had subsequently was the same way. And yes, I think Ed recognized in me a kindred spirit, somebody who kind of wore his heart on his sleeve. I would kind of open up to him, and I think he knew that he could open up to me, and I wasn't going to go tell somebody or go write about it, even though he'd oftentimes say, don't print that, you know, but that was more times than not if he was talking about a band dynamic, which at the time, had I written about it, him talking about Michael or Dave, when the third album hadn't come out yet, yes, that could have been disastrous, but, I never printed any of that stuff. Yes, I think I was a kindred spirit. I really do. And I think that Ed, and I don't say this lightly, Ed trusted me, man. And that meant so much to me that, I would have done anything for the guy. And I always tried to be there for him. Actually, my regret is that maybe I should have opened up more to him, and maybe should have said some other things to him. I think about his cigarette smoking, and I despised it, and I write about it, and I would get migraine headaches because of cigarette smoke, not from Edward, which it never happened somehow, but or the drugs or the drinking, even with a very good friend. Do you say those things to him? I don't know, man. I could not bring myself to say those things, and I regret that. Some other bits and pieces, Ed, why would you let Sammy bring in his own manager? I thought that was a mistake. Look, I'm not saying that he wasn't an amazing manager and did right by the band, but, I thought that was a mistake. Signing with Kramer.
Oh, yeah.
Endorsing Kramer. Look, I'm not talking about the quality of Kramer's guitars. Edward obviously dug the guitars. But why would you endorse the guitars? You could say to Kramer, listen, these are the specs. Make 10 guitars for me. If I like them, I'll use them. And if not, I won't use them. But you're not going to use my name. And it goes back to Edward not understanding his own legacy, or thinking it's important enough to do that. In Ed's mind, well, yeah, fuck it. I'll put my name on a guitar. Who cares, And then we find out and I don't want to give the book away, but we find out what Kramer did by bringing in fucking Steve Vai, who's an amazing guitar player. But, them betraying Edward. I told you, Ed, but I didn't tell you,
How do you do that? Real quick, not to give the book away, but you just said, how the fuck do you do that? Like, Steve Vai, amazing. But He's Eddie Van Halen in the mid 80s. There was no one bigger than Eddie Van Halen in the mid 80s. How does that even happen? That Berardi guy is such a jackass, man.
I never liked Dennis Berardi. I write about that. He treated me like garbage because he was always afraid I was whispering in Ed's ear, yeah, Ed, play more keyboards. That was Dennis's great fear. So what does he do? He goes out and finds Steve Vai, again, an amazing guitar player. But, Dennis making Edward buy his own fucking tickets to the NAMM show?
That's amazing.
Oh, my God. I never... And that goes back to Ed never wanting to do the book back in '85 because it's not important. No one's going to care. My career, people will think it's over. And that goes to the humility of the guy and, a little bit of that humbleness or insecurity. As astonishing as it seems, that's where it all comes from, I believe.
But there's the juxtaposition too, because you also said at one point that Ed, you said something about new music, and Ed said, I turn on the radio and all I hear is me. So at the same time, there's this weird thing of like, I don't know that I'm doing this or whatever, and then he turns on the radio, and I mean, there's not a guitar player probably born, I don't know, that was 16 or 18, let's say 14 to 21 when the first Van Halen album came out, that or a teenage boy that said, I don't want to, I'm dropping everything to do this. I mean, Miles Kennedy as much as said so, right, from Alter Bridge, and he's more of a singer than a guitar player, right? And that's not a unique story, right? I mean, you've heard that probably from 5 million people, and it's like the idea that like he kind of didn't know, but he sort of still did know. That's a weird thing to sort of probably bounce around in someone's brain, you know what I mean? And I thought there was another interesting point where he said, and I can't use the word because we're politically correct here, but he's like, okay, so-and-so copies so-and-so copies so-and-so copies so-and-so, and it's inbreeding, right, to the point of, and Ed was like, look, I invented the maybe mostly invented the finger tapping, and then I moved on with my life, And like, how did you feel about his whole perception of how that was perceived by him, and what he... Did he truly know how he had influenced so many guitar players?
Those were the kinds of discussions I wish I could have had more from him, Brian. I wanted to sit down and talk to him about all those guitar players because his the panorama of the guitar players he liked was pretty vast. He loved Alan Holdsworth and Billy Gibbons. But there were so many other guitar players I wanted to ask him about. It is strange. Yeah, he said he'd turn on the radio and he'd hear people and they were copying him, and that pissed him off. And yet he never would say, yeah, man, it's because, my approach has been so unique and, everybody listens to me. That was never part of it. I don't know if he ever connected those two pieces, that he was so pervasive everywhere that guys, like you said, were bound to listen to him and be influenced by him. It was a strange thing. I really wish I could have had more conversations about his influences. And I write a little bit about, how Edward's knowledge of music, it wasn't real deep. I'm not talking about his technical knowledge as a guitar player or songwriter. That was ridiculous. But, like the history of music, and when he comes over the house and I, let him borrow some records, and he had never heard of Les Paul at that point, and I gave him a bunch of like guys, Steely Dan, who he knew of, but, Larry Carlton, a lot of these kinds of guys, he was into the prog stuff, and I gave him a bunch of, deeper prog records, I think I gave him like Soft Machine and Colosseum, some of these more obscure English bands. So yeah, man, it was a weird thing. I really wish I could have more conversations. Ed, do you realize who you are and what you've done, But I think he only would have gotten pissed off by a comment like that. Oh yeah.
Is it? I mean, how do I phrase this? I guess I'll just like flat out. Is it possible to explain why he was different? And I say that because in your career, you've interviewed everybody, like a Jeff Beck and Jimmy Page and Ted Nugent, you know, all, you know, even beyond guitar players, you know, Ronnie James Dio, all these incredible figures. But Eddie always felt a little different. And, you know, he did feel a little more personal. You know, it's, you know, rock stars always feel like, oh, you know, they're the rock star, I'm the fan. Something about Eddie was always different. It was always, oh man, that guy's kind of like me in some way. Is there a way to, quantify that difference? Why he was so special and why he wasn't like the typical famous musician rock star guy?
I mean, I suppose that's another conversation I wish I could have had in depth. Edward was the guy on stage who smiled and didn't grimace and didn't, you know, his poses were all of the moment, you know, and they weren't orchestrated or choreographed. You felt like you could be his friend and you could hang out with him. It's such a hard question. I mean, how do you characterize, you know, charisma or that thing? What set him apart? Because as you said, there were some other very good guitar players around at the time when Ed was playing. I mean, Randy Rhoads, you know, George Lynch, Warren DeMartini, Rusty Anderson. I mean, these are amazing guitar players. But Ed had that thing, you know. I don't know what that is, man. It's just something that every note he played mattered to him, and you sensed that. And when he was holding a guitar and playing music, you had the feeling that there was no other place he would rather have been. It's a hard question. I mean, I don't think it's anything. Obviously, it's all tied up in the music. Had he been, you know, a marginal guitar player and you know, an average songwriter, I mean, you know, I don't think he would have been the Eddie Van Halen that we do. I do believe that looking like that certainly didn't hurt. You know, had he been a 300-pound balding guy with pimples, you know, who had written that same music, you know what I mean. But so sure. that was a huge part of it. Obviously, the smile. I don't know, man. You just felt connected to the guy in a way that you didn't with all these other guitar players. They were always somehow one degree removed. And that's nothing that Edward ever tried to cultivate. That's just who he was. I mean, he was a rare diamond, man. He was just one of a kind. I mean, I wish I had a more specific answer for you.
That's why I asked, because to me it is difficult. And again, I started off the show telling, you know, my experience of meeting him, and to me it was just being in his environment, in that, like, you know, he was on the stage and I was down in the crowd. Even then, it just felt like it wasn't just the rock star guy up there jamming. It was like it's the only way I can say is it was like one of your buddies who's amazing at music gets up there and he's jamming. You're like, God damn, that guy can play. And it was just, there was something so personal about him. And on top of that, the playing itself was, you know, I've seen any number of, like, you know, really famous and phenomenal guitar players, like nose to nose, you know, Marty Friedman, guys like that. And, you know, Zach Wilde and stuff. And with Ed, I mean, I'd read, like I said, I've read everything there is to read about Eddie Van, every article, you know, to the point where, you know, in your book, you know, some of the stuff that was in Guitar World, I knew the parts that were published because I'm like, I remember this. This is the part. Like, I'd read it so many times, you know, and everyone always said, like, when you watch him play in person, it's like he's born to do it. It was like, this is what he was put on earth to do. And I always thought that sounded kind of hyperbolic or cheesy, but I'm not kidding you, man. Like, when he walked out with that guitar, Steve, like he went, shh, like, to all of us. We're like, oh shit, shut up. And his fingers, I'll never forget this. His hands barely moved. And this is in an arena down in Columbus, Ohio, that holds like 24,000 people. It's just 50 people and him on stage. And he just barely touches the guitar and it screams. And he grabs my, like, what? and then all of a sudden you hear all the notes, but his hands are doing this. Like it looks like slow motion. And I was like, I will never forget it as long as I live. I went, what the fuck am I watching? Like, it was everything I'd read was true. It looked like, I mean, I'll never see anything like it ever again. He was just born to do that. And I mean, for you to have that experience, you know, in your living room with just just plugged in, like, I mean, what is it like for you to read these other stories and these other books, but you're not reading it from my perspective? Like, I'm like, oh my God, this is such a great story. For you, that's personal. You're like, oh yeah, I understand that. Oh yeah, I was there. Like, can you explain what that's like, where all these things about Eddie have just this extra added meaning? I know it's a weird question, it might be a difficult one, but it's just, that just struck me while I was reading your book. Like, what is it like to read the things I'm reading, but actually know what's going on behind Eddie's eyes, man, like in his mind as this is happening?
That's an interesting question. I mean, to be honest, John, I haven't read a lot of those other books cover to cover. But getting back to your point about Edward and the guitar, there are guitar players who were born to it. And I can think of two. Look, there are hundreds of astonishing guitar players in this world, but the ones who I believe are truly elevated to that Van Halen status was Hendrix, who I never met him. I never had a chance to interview him. I did see him live twice. And Jeff Beck. And when I interviewed Jeff Beck, I actually brought a guitar that I had, this all walnut 66 Strat, really nice guitar. And I sat there 2 feet away from Jeff watching him play, and I never seen anything like that. I've seen a lot of guitar players hold guitars in place, and this was something not of this earth. Ed did that stuff, and it was effortless, and it was, no other guitar player could ever play like that. You know, I mean, getting back to your point about, reading this other stuff in books, I mean, I just haven't read enough books to know that, more specifically what you're talking about. I can tell you, sitting in my living room and watching him play the guitar, sitting that close, we all know how amazing he is, and we've seen him on stage, and we've seen him live. Watching him play, being that close, and not even plugged into an amp or plugged into one of my little, Deluxe or Ampeg, whatever it was, and watching him, and watching his left hand on the neck, man, and it was just, and he's doing these things, man, and it's like, and watching his picking hand, and then he does that flutter thing, and he had a really heavy pick attack.
Yeah.
His left hand was really light, man, but he had which is how he articulated all those notes, It was just, I kept saying to myself, oh my God, he really is that amazing. He really is that extraordinary. It's not like I think he was that extraordinary. He truly is, Yeah, it was just amazing. I mean, I was lucky. I was lucky to have been there for sure. Yeah.
That's like I said, it's crazy, like reading your book, because again, it is personal to me, and I didn't have nearly the experience you did, but in the tiny bit of time that I had, like, the book resonates. I'm like, yeah, that's how I felt. Like, like it just resonated off of him. I mean, it was just, oh my God, it was, I'm sorry. All right. So one of my buddies has blown me up, Steve. He has a question for you.
Yeah.
He wants to know if he can buy an original edition signed by you. He wants the original version, and he wants a signature. He wants to know what he has to pay to get that from you.
I'll sell him an original edition signed for $800. I'm kidding. I wish I
He'll
wish
pay it.
I had
He'll
some
pay
first
it.
editions. I wish I had some first editions left. I stupidly sold them all and didn't even hold back a box or two for myself. I think I have, honestly, man, I think I have one, maybe two copies. I wish I did, man. I'd happily sell you one and sign it for you.
I'll tell him $1,000. Would $1,000 get it done?
A grand? A grand, I might be able to fish up. I might be able to find another first edition. No.
You could just handwrite it in a spiral notebook.
There you go. Yep. Yeah, he is. Yes, there he is. There he is. Sold. All right, you just made $1,000. See, there you go, Steve.
So let me ask you a question, James. Is it because it has to be because of the cover? Because the contents, the text is basically the same, even though the second edition, and I never told anybody this. In the first edition, I had made there were a few typos, which make me cringe like you cannot even believe when I come across them. So I tried to fix them for the second edition, and a couple of the interior pictures are a little different. The photo sections are a little different. I think I added a couple more photos, that picture of Ronnie Dio, and I think the picture of the Iron Maiden guys and me with the guitar. But everything else is exactly the same. So is it just the cover that you want? I mean, it has to be. And the back cover, because the back cover of the second one is also different. So
well, I could tell you, knowing him as I do, it's he wants every Van Halen thing he can get. Like, he is like, I play in a band with 2 guitar players, and we absolutely nerd out over Eddie. Like, we literally, I live 2 hours away from them. And we'll get together when we don't have shows. And one of the things that we did one night, we sat down there with a couple bottles of Crown, and they brought a bunch of amps and effects, and they were damn sure going to recreate the wet, dry, wet sound from 1995's Balance record. So that's the kind of shit that we do when we get together, right? That's how nerdy we are for this. Well, my buddy Jimmy, he's my original Van Halen buddy, because he is the brother-in-law of a guy I played in a band with for several years back in my late teens, early 20s, mid 20s, whatever. And he said, "You've got to meet my brother-in-law. He might be a bigger Van Halen fan than you." And I said, "That person doesn't exist." So he got us in touch, and Jimmy and I have been friends ever since. And he is an absolute goof, and I love him. And he wants it because he's been texting me off the hook about this interview as we're going. Like, it's like, this guy fucking rules. Like, I need that book. Give me a first edition signed. So there you go. If you can drum one up, you got $1,000. And if you have PayPal, there you go.
I'll look around. I'll look around.
There you go, Jimmy. And if not, Jimmy, would you be able to sell it? Would you be able to sell him a second edition with a signature, Steve? Would you be able to autograph one for him if he orders it?
That's only $700. Yeah. I'll happily sign it, Jimmy.
Yes. You know what, Steve? I'll pitch in an extra 100 just because you're helping me bust my friend's balls. So it's up to $800. Oh my God. Well, we don't want to keep you too much longer, Steve, but I mean, this is amazing. Holy shit. So I know, Brian, you have a question, and then I did want to get to one quick story from the book, as we talked about, Steve, because I think it really encapsulates the book, but I know Brian had a quick question for you here.
So quick question, and I'm sure you probably follow along and have heard some of the Wolfgang interviews about the vast collection of tapes that are sitting there in the studio. In your conversations with Ed, is there a lot of material that was never released, like in full song form, or are we just talking hours of riffs? Or do you have any idea what is sitting in 5150? And can you comment if you do know?
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, there's the one comment Ed makes in the book that he had 10 CDs worth of music, or 9 CDs. I can tell you that I saw boxes, big boxes, filled with cassettes. I mean, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cassettes. Are they completed songs? I doubt it. Are there some amazing riffs on there? Undoubtedly. I don't know what's in the vault. I never saw the vault. I mean, maybe these are, rough demos of maybe, Al and Ed, and maybe Ed is playing bass. Is it all amazing stuff? I'm sure a lot of it's incredible. I'm sure a lot of it's just ideas and stuff. Will it ever see the light of day? Wolf is out there doing his thing, and I think that's great. He's an extraordinarily talented kid, man. He obviously has the Van Halen blood running through his veins. Will there be a point in time when he can sit back and go through that and archive this stuff and find out what's worthwhile? I don't know. I honestly don't know. But in answer to your question, Brian, I mean, I think there's probably some extraordinary stuff there. My sense is that a lot of it is just what Ed would call noodling, which to say maybe there are verses and choruses there, the basis of a song, so Wolf goes back and pulls out those songs for a different kind of truth. So maybe there's more stuff at that stage of completion in there.
All right. You just brought something up. All right. You're either going to be on Team John or Team Brian here, Steven. I'm going to put you.
Well, we know where he's going to go here.
Oh, yeah.
Uh-oh.
Steven, a different kind of truth. Fan or not a fan?
It didn't do much for me.
Damn it. You're on Team Brian.
I'm sorry. Look, I need to add a caveat there.
Sure.
So that comes out. When is that? 2010.
February? No, February 2012. Yeah.
12. Okay.
It was like right around my birthday. I will never forget that. I was like, "Holy shit, new Van Halen! Oh my god!"
So, okay, so it's been 9 years since I last spoke to Ed. The record comes out, and maybe there was still some, I don't know, man, lingering resentment, something, I don't know. Maybe I didn't want it to be amazing. I know that's a selfish thing to say.
Sure.
But I don't know if that's true. I think I really wanted to hear it and be blown away. I thought it was good. I just didn't think it was. I didn't think it deserved a spot within the canon of the great Van Halen records. The first 6, to my mind. Those are my feelings. Some people might call it their favorite record. Some people might say that, they were older riffs and Ed was playing amazingly. I wouldn't dispute that. It just didn't resonate that loudly with me.
Sure. Okay. All right. Well, there you go, Brian. Steve's on your side. All right.
Yeah, I just feel like it felt kind of, my word I always use is sort of forced. Like, okay, we're trying to go back and trying to recreate, and that's always dangerous ground no matter who you are. And I did want it to be great, and but there's plenty of people that love that album, and there's plenty of people that are wrong. It's like John. So
Brian, you bring up a good point. It's hard to go back and try to revisit history and recreate. And this is going to get me shot down for sure. The new Stones record, which is the whole thing is now available on YouTube. And I was at the gym and I listened to it, and it's like, yeah, it's okay, but it's like there's a song that's kind of like reminiscent of Wild Horses, but it's not nearly as good as Wild Horses. And there's a song that's a little bit reminiscent of Start Me Up, but the riff isn't nearly as good as Start Me Up. It's like, yeah, I mean, look, Mick and Keith, they're never going to write really bad songs, but it was like,
right.
It was like derivative. It was like a modern band taking what the Stones were, and it was uncomfortable, and I'm not saying that it didn't have moments, but it just, put it next to Sticky Fingers, and it's like, oh my God, it's like, forget it. So, but that's me.
So real quick, let's get another plug in for the book. If you guys want to pick up a copy of Tonechaser, Understanding Edward, my 26-year journey with Edward Van Halen, you have to do it. just go to tonechaserbook.com. You can pick one up there. It'll only cost you $1,000 for an autographed copy, as we just
Exactly.
if your name is James Lever.
Exactly.
But yeah, guys, seriously, go pick this book up. Sorry to fanboy about it, but it is my favorite Van Halen book. It's absolutely fantastic, especially if you're a massive Van Halen honk like me. Steve, like I say, we'll only keep you a couple more minutes. Thank you so much for all this time. I could keep going for days talking about Eddie and this book. God, there's so many things. I want to ask. I want to close with a quick story from the book, like we talked about offline.
Yeah.
But, man, I mean,
I'll come back. I'll come back anytime you want, man.
That is fine with me. Let's do it. I am all in with that, man. I could talk about this forever, man. Like,
so we do this, Steve, real quick, not to interrupt, John. We do this series where we deep dive albums. Like, we would love to get you in, maybe deep dive something like VH2 or Fair Warning or something like that would be, because we already did 84, I think, didn't we, John?
Yeah, that's the most influential record of my life. So,
but yeah, something like one of those two, man. If we could get you on and go track by track, that would be amazing.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite of the? I know you said that, like the Holy Grail for Van Halen for you is the original 6, the Dave records. Do you have a favorite of those?
I tend to say Fair Warning, but I've been listening to like the first one, I put it on at the gym, and God, the second one was so good too. But I think Fair Warning. I mean, I think that's where it really crystallized for him. The songs are way more orchestrated and layered, and he has a chance to, overdub and, put down 8,000 guitar tracks and, have the time to do what he wanted to do. And again, that, when I write about that, that was the record, made him sick because he had, worked so hard on it and that whole thing. But my God, his playing on that record, wow, incredible.
It's always so interesting to me that always seems to be, at least, at the very least, for the Dave fans, the one they go to, because to me, that record is always like, if you kind of like dig into it, it's almost like half of a record of normal stuff. Like the first side, it's like normal songs, and then you get to the second half, you're like, all right, Unchained. But then you got Push Comes to Shove and One Foot Out the Door and Sunday Afternoon in the Park, and it's really weird on the second half. Like, and I wonder if that's the reason why it's like potentially the most creative Van Halen record that he did, at least with the Dave lineup. Maybe that's what it is, because that always strikes me about that album, is that after Unchained, you're like, all these different weirdo things coming at you,
I mean, it could be. I also thought that, Dave's vocals on there were good. Look, and I write about it, and no offense, Dave, and I think you were integral to Van Halen, but I was never a big David Lee Roth fan, but I thought that his work on that record was really good, so maybe that was part of it as well. But yeah, man, it's a pretty eclectic record for sure. Yeah. Amazing record.
That was my first album. So I had gotten joined the Columbia Record and Tape Club, right? And I was kind of big into, I was sort of big into like Kiss, Billy Squier at the time, I think.
So you're saying Fair Warning cost you 1/12 of a penny?
So I got like 7 cassettes in the mail, and Fair Warning and Mean Street comes on, and I'm like, what is that? I mean, I must have rewound that song 25 times going, what did I just hear? And then I finally got Dirty Movie started. I'm like, oh my God, because I'd obviously heard the first Van Halen album, this is the most craziest guitar thing I ever heard. And then I heard this, and I'm like, this is just taking it to a whole new level.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty amazing.
All right, Steve, so I have one last question for you. And then if you wouldn't mind closing the show with a very short story from the book, because again, as I teased earlier, I really think the story that I'd like you to tell just is such an incredible view into the book itself. And I think it really helps sell it. So the short question is, at one point in the book, you talk about having a lot of bootleg recordings of Van Halen live from way back in the day. You know, this was, you know, this was during the interview, you know, when Dave had quit the band. You said you'd started collecting some of them. Do you still have any of those?
You know, oddly, I only have a couple. Where the rest of them went, I do not know. And the ones I have are probably fairly common knowledge. There was one from Pasadena City College, which I think is circulated around. There's one from them playing one of the shows in the UK the first time they went over, and maybe one or two others. I don't know where the other ones went. I think maybe someone had sort of given them to me, and then they wanted them back or something like that. Because for the life of me, I do not have them. So, yeah.
How much gold do you think was on? Like, do you think back then, go, God damn it, if I could go back and say, Steve, put these in a vault.
Yeah, man. Yeah, there's probably some amazing stuff there.
Wow.
Don't remind me, John, please.
I'm sorry. That's just, it's just so amazing to me to think, like, just, you know what I'm going to listen to tonight? I'm listening to some 1975 Eddie Van Halen. What the hell? Like, you know, all these different things. Like, that's just so cool, man. So, Steve, this has been amazing. You know, we can't thank you enough, but personally, I can't thank you enough. Literally, Eddie Van Halen changed my life. I would not have my friends, my family, my wife, my band, if it wasn't for Eddie Van Halen. And this book to me just hit me like nothing else has. And I just think is a fantastic read, and to be able to talk to you about it in depth is just such a thrill. It's crazy. So thank you so much for the time. I want you to close with a quick story, as we talked about. And when we're done, if you could hang out just for a quick second after we go off air, I just want to talk to you for a quick second, and then, you know, politely say goodbye. And so just like, all right, see you later. You know? So, yeah. But again, guys, before Steve gets into the story, which I just think is amazing, I read this and was like, holy shit, this book rules. And it's just a very short story, but the book is called Tonechaser, Understanding Edward, My 26-Year Journey with Edward Van Halen. You can get it at tonechaserbook.com. You can get it on Amazon, I believe, Steve. It's available at a number of retailers.
Right. Amazon, Reverb, eBay, and Etsy. If anybody goes to
Etsy. I got this reprint from the 0812 tour off of Etsy.
Did you really?
Oh yeah, my wife is incredibly creative. She's a Head Start teacher, and she just is artistic as all hell. And she knows my love of Van Halen. So my Christmas present 2 years ago was she found identical tour reprints from the 5150 tour, the 0812 tour, and the For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge tour. And I just, holy shit, man. So this is, you know, yeah, my wife kind of rules. She's a rock girl herself, so she understands.
That's great, man.
But yeah, so all right, Steve, again, thank you so much, guys. He is Steven Rosen. You can find him anywhere. Just look up guitar writing, and he's there. He's fucking Steve Rosen, dude. So check out Tonechaser, Understanding Edward, My 26-Year Journey with Edward Van Halen. Steve, close us out with this amazing story. I just love this story. It's just. So you had to go with Eddie Van Halen to go buy guitar strings at Guitar Center. So take it away.
Right. And who could believe that? Least of all me. Right. So the chapter, and I thought this was clever, is called No Strings Attached, right?
Nice.
I thought, how clever is that? So I'm up at 5150, and it's just some afternoon, and Edward is taking the strings off a guitar. And, you know, he's surrounded by other guitars, and they all have strings, but he's taking the strings off this guitar. And he gets done taking them off, and he goes over to the cabinet where he obviously must have kept the other guitar strings. And he's searching around, and he's looking around, and he can't find them there. And he goes into another cabinet, and he can't find them there. And he looks at me, and he says, I don't have any guitar strings. And I think this must be a joke, right? This is like candid camera to see what my reaction is.
So
how can you not have a set of guitar strings? And, you know, we're in 5150, and there's like $8 billion worth of gear. And there's every microphone and outboard effect and the board and the guitars. And it's like, how do you not have a set of guitar strings? And I thought it was unbelievable. And what happens next is even more unbelievable. And he says, well, I need a set of guitar strings, So I'm saying, yeah. He says, let's go get a set of guitar strings. Oh, okay. So we go outside and we jump into his Countach, which I can barely maneuver myself into. And we go driving down to the Guitar Center on Ventura Boulevard to buy guitar strings. Eddie Van Halen does not have a set of guitar strings. And that is unbelievable. And what is more unbelievable is that he is going to go get the guitar strings himself. As if he couldn't have called one of his guys, whether they were, on the clock or not. Guys, I need some strings. Go bring me a dozen set of strings. He was not going to do that. He was going to go get the guitar strings himself. So we're driving there, and I'm driving in the Countach with Edward Van Halen down Ventura Boulevard. And this is just an unbelievable experience. And yes, he was driving fucking fast. And it was fucking cool. And we're driving, and it's only like, 8 miles away. And he gets there in about 3 minutes, and goes screeching into the parking lot. And we get out and we walk in the front door. And there's a couple other people there. And there's a guy behind the counter. And we start walking over. And I watch this guy behind the counter. And he recognizes who this is. And honestly, man, I thought he was going to collapse. I thought he was going to fall over or stroke out. And we walk up, and he's looking at Ed. And his mouth is agog, and he's looking at Ed. And Ed says, yeah, man, I need a set of strings. And this guy's saying, yeah, The guy, Ed says, I think he said, I need a set of Fenders. And so he goes off and gets the set of strings, and brings them back. And the whole time this guy is just looking at him. And it's, he's incredulous. This cannot be Edward Van Halen standing in front of him. And I don't know if the guy ever saw the irony of Edward Van Halen being in a Guitar Center buying a set of guitar strings. The one thing is if it was in there buying another keyboard or another guitar or an amp or some pedals, but a set of guitar strings, and I'm watching this guy, and this guy is trying to maintain his cool. And he asked Edward for a signature, an autograph, and Ed gave that to him. And Edward, goes and pulls out his wallet, and, he's looking through it, and he goes to me, he goes, do you have any money? I go, yeah. He goes, man, could you buy the guitar strings? So not only these three elements tell you everything there is to know about him. So not only did he not have a set of guitar strings in the most expensive studio that probably existed for 2,000 miles, he goes to get the strings himself, and then he doesn't have $10 to buy the guitar strings. That just tells you that, he never, obviously he didn't think of himself as Edward Van Halen, the legend. He needed a set of guitar strings. And how do I get a set of guitar strings as quickly as possible? You go and you buy them, right? And I don't have any money, so I'm going to ask my friend Steve if I can borrow $10. So I give him $10, and he doesn't borrow $20. He doesn't buy 2 sets. He buys 1 set of guitar strings. I mean, my God, that tells you everything. Like, he didn't want to, impose by borrowing $20 from me, I mean, it was so perfect. So then we go, and we stop at a liquor store, and I knew he didn't have any money. He says, hey, man, can I borrow some money for a beer? He goes, yeah, man, whatever you need, So I put it on the credit card. And so Edward Van Halen, driving in his $150,000 Countach from his $2 million whatever studio cost in his $8 million home, borrows $20 from me for beer and $10 for guitar strings. I mean, it was perfect. We go back and, he's putting the strings on, and, I'm looking at him, and, maybe I'd asked him, or he said, well, it's got to be this guitar. Like, he didn't have another 50 guitars identical to that, but it had to be that guitar that he was playing, to work out these ideas he had, And I could sense when he was I knew when Ed was getting into, music mode and songwriting mode. And, I could tell that, our day was over, so I said, hey man, I'll see you later, So I go back outside and jump in my car and drive home. And, yeah, man, those things just say so much about the guy, humility, going to buy your own guitar strings at Guitar Center. I don't see Jimmy Page doing that anytime soon. Or
Right.
Richie Blackmore, Pete Townsend, or Robin Trower, or anybody I can think of, anybody you could name. They just didn't do it. Which goes back to your point, John, of how you feel so connected with Edward Van Halen. Yeah, man, you might walk into Guitar Center and Ed would be there buying guitar strings. And no, he never paid me back. And Ed, you owe me $30, buddy. Yeah, that was an amazing day. I love that day, man.
That is, dude, what a way to close out the interview, man. That's exactly what I wanted you to tell that, because it is, like you say, $150,000 car, $2 million studio, $8 million house. Hey man, let's go to Guitar Center. I need to buy strings. Can you loan me $10? And now let's go to the gas station and snag $20 worth of beer. That's exactly what you get out of the book, man. That's why I love it so much. Like, I just think that story tells the tale of Tonechaser so well. It's your guys' friendship and just who he was, and just, again, humility. We've said it so many times. Humility.
Yeah,
man.
I really appreciate that.
No,
Yeah,
anytime.
Man. Yeah, man, and he, the fact that, on the other side that he felt that we were friends enough that he could ask to borrow $10, right? Because even good friends,
Yep.
like, oh, I want to borrow money from you, He never offered to pay back, and I would never ask, So that was a part of the friendship too, I mean, like I was going to ask him, like I really cared. I mean, Christ, he could have, I would have given him anything he wanted. Ed, you want an amp? What do you want today, Ed? So yeah,
Yep.
It says everything about the guy.
It just speaks to the reality of the relationship
Exactly.
you guys had. It wasn't, oh, you're trying to get interviews off him or he's leeching off you because he needs some guy just to spill his guts to. Like, nah, man, you guys were actual buds. Like, hey, bro, I don't got any money. Like, got $20 for beer. Fuck yeah, dude. Here you go. Like, it's the honor system. You'll get it back some way later. So.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And he never offered me a beer either.
What? He drank. All right. Start the interview over. Let's talk about Eddie Van Halen being a selfish beer drinker.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice. All right, Steve. Well, if you can hold out in the green room just for a second, we're going to close up the show. Again, Steve, I cannot thank you enough for coming on. Guys, again, the book is Tonechaser, Understanding Edward, My 26-Year Journey with Edward Van Halen. Pick up your copy at tonechaserbook.com. Steve, I'll talk to you in just a second, but again, thank you so very much. This has just been such a thrill for me to have you on, and thank you so much for the time you've given us, man. Appreciate it.
It was great, guys. I really appreciate you having me, and very excellent conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we'll talk to you in just a second, man.
Yep.
Well, Brian, Steve is very lucky that I have some couth, because otherwise I'd been talking to him till next Thursday. You know me, I can never get enough Van Halen talking, and boy, that was, holy shit, that was fucking awesome. Wow.
Yeah, it's still surreal. Like, I posed the question to him, do you sit back and reflect later? And then at the same time we're talking and I'm going, this is like, to be this close to someone who was that close to someone else. Like, I don't think it's going to sink in for a while. Like, I mean, it's just, there's just very few people that will impact a generation, in any shape or form, be it, I don't know, politically, socially, economically, scientifically, entertainment wise. It's just, there just are not that many, the odds are just stacked against it. It's a very, 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 very small percentage. And for Steve,
Ed was one of them.
Yeah. And Ed was one of them. And Steve was like, he was there in, maybe right place, right time, but he was an incredible friend to Eddie. Also, it was a very 50-50 kind of a relationship,
Yep.
And it's just very cool to hear the story, man.
And I think that's the other thing, is that it's not just, hey, here's some stories about Ed and we were like, it was so reciprocal. It just goes beyond what you would want to read as a fan. Again, I come at this strictly as a guy who just eats, sleeps, and breathes Van Halen. I've got, if I look up right here on my wall, I've got pictures of them from the 1984 tour. I've got a 45 of the Panama single. I've got, the reprints of Van Halen and Women and Children First. The pictures that I have from the Fair Warning tour, there was a very good buddy of mine out in Youngstown who lost his brother, and his brother was an enormous Van Halen fan and took those pictures in 1981 front row and had him framed on his wall. And when his brother passed, he said he mailed me those pictures. I hadn't talked to him in a couple of years, and out of nowhere he says, "What's your address?" And I gave it to him, and I get that in the mail. He knew I was that big of a Van Halen fan, and he knew that that's how much it would mean. He said, and I actually have the card that he wrote with it, with those pictures as well. And he's like, I wanted these to go to someone who would appreciate them. And I know that you, of all people, you were the person I knew that would appreciate these the most. And it's, so Van Halen's personal to me and obviously personal to Steve. And it's just, the book is absolutely fantastic. It's not just a musician biography. It's not just, here's my personal stories. Like, it's very heartfelt, and it's way more than I could have ever expected to have read. So many thanks to Steve. Real quick, my buddy Jimmy chiming in one last time. Jimmy, thanks for tuning in, man. Dude, I'm glad you had a great time, Jimmy, because I know you and I are going to get together and just nerd out over this. But it says, thank you, Steve, for the amazing stories. What a great interview. Looking forward to the autographed book. Well, Jimmy, Steve's looking forward to your $1,000. So... So,
though, it just highlights. I mean, we get older and we get more sentimental, but a true friend is really, it's an unpaid therapist. I mean, Eddie was able to, to really be vulnerable with Steve, and Steve was able to also voice his insecurities, and they had each other's back, when they could.
Dude, and I can't say anything any better than that. That's such a great encapsulation of this book. So. All right, guys, we're going to close up shop from here. Again, one last time, go pick up your copy of Tonechaser, Understanding Edward, My 26-Year Journey with Edward Van Halen by Steven Rosen. You can get it at tonechaserbook.com. Guys, again, I can't recommend it enough, so go pick that up. We will be right back here in 2 weeks on Thursday, November 16th at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And once again, guys, don't forget that on Friday, it is not a Thursday, Friday, December 22nd, it is going to be our annual fan hangout. If you would like to jump on camera and co-host the show with Brian and I, send us an email. It's talkingintoinfinity@gmail.com, and you are more than welcome to come on, jump on camera. We talk about anything that night. It is a free-form discussion of just us and our friends and viewers and listeners just nerding out on whatever topics you want, preferably music. In fact, we keep it to music, but whatever. If you want to talk Star Wars, I'm open. Fuck you, Brian. Anyway, so we will see you guys in 2 weeks on Thursday, November 16th at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Once again, thank you to Steven Rosen for coming on with us. That is amazing. We're going to talk to him about coming on again sometime in the future because I think he's open to it, and I would love to do it. So see you in 2 weeks. And as always, guys, carpe